My husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law, Serena, called me dramatic for crying, demanding we discuss his $8 million inheritance right there. My sons just stood by, letting her. I simply looked at her, a silent promise forming in my heart. What they didn't know was Arthur had a plan. Stay tuned to see how Arthur's true legacy unfolded. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The autumn air bit sharply, mirroring the raw ache in Alara Vance's chest as she watched the coffin descend. It was a Tuesday morning in October, crisp and unforgiving. Her millionaire husband, Arthur, was gone, lowered into the cold earth. Around her, only the somber face of the pastor and a lone groundskeeper offered any semblance of quiet respect. Alara felt a profound, desolate loneliness. Arthur, her rock, her confidant, was now just a memory beneath a mound of fresh soil. Yet this solemn tableau was brutally interrupted. From the adjacent funeral home parking lot, a cacophony of laughter and loud chatter drifted over, shattering the fragile peace. It was her family. Her sons, Liam and Ethan, with their bays, Serena and Clara, were already in full-blown celebration mode. Alara could pick out Serena's piercing laugh, cutting through the silence of her grief like a shard of glass. She heard snippets of conversation about travel plans, a European vacation, and the excited clinking of what sounded suspiciously like champagne flutes. The blatant disrespect was a fresh wound atop her already gaping grief. The kind pastor, a man named Reverend Miller, stood beside her, his hand a gentle comfort on her arm. His eyes, filled with genuine sorrow, offered the only true sympathy she had received all morning. "Mrs. Vance, Arthur was a good man," he murmured, his voice soft, a stark contrast to the distant, booming merriment. He lingered, offering a quiet blessing, while her family, even from a distance, seemed to radiate an eagerness for the ceremony to conclude, their impatience almost palpable. No sooner had Reverend Miller stepped away than Serena, Alara's elder daughter-in-law, marched toward her. Her designer heels clicked aggressively on the gravel path. There was no pretense of comfort, no soft word of condolence. Her face, usually meticulously made up, was set in an expression of thinly veiled annoyance. "Honestly, Alara, stop being so dramatic," Serena declared, her voice carrying across the quiet graveyard, making Alara flinch. "Arthur's gone, and now we have urgent matters to discuss. There's no need to carry on like this." Alara's eyes, still wet with unshed tears, met Serena's cold, demanding gaze. Her sons, Liam and Ethan, flanked Serena, their shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground, avoiding their mother's pained expression. They looked uncomfortable, certainly, but remained utterly silent, their inaction a louder betrayal than any spoken word. Clara, Ethan's wife, stood a little further back, her face a mask of polite indifference, but she too said nothing. "Urgent matters?" Alara managed, her voice a reedy whisper. The question was not just about the urgency, but the sheer lack of compassion. Serena tossed her head, a dismissive gesture. "Yes, the inheritance, the $8 million. How Arthur's estate is to be divided." She spoke as if discussing a grocery list, the words $8 million delivered with a hungry precision. Liam, finally lifting his gaze for a split second, interjected. "Dad showed us a will last year, Mom. It divided everything equally amongst us. We just need to formalize it." Alara stared at him, bewildered. A will? Divided equally? Arthur had never mentioned anything of the sort to her. Their wills had always been structured to ensure her lifelong security. The thought sent a cold dread through her. Serena cut in before Alara could even process Liam's words. "Time is a luxury we don't have, Alara. Arthur always said you weren't good with business matters. Best to get this sorted quickly and efficiently." Her words were a stinging blow, stripping Alara not only of her grief, but of her competency and worth. The drive home was a blur of humiliation. Serena, without a word, took the keys to Alara's luxury sedan, directing her to the passenger seat. Liam and Ethan followed in Arthur's vintage convertible, while Clara drove her own car. Alara sat in silence, watching the familiar landscape pass by, feeling like a stranger in her own life, a passenger in her own car, driven home by the very people who were already dismantling her future. The moment they stepped through the front door of the sprawling, elegant home Arthur had built for them, Serena and Liam began their chilling inventory. Their hands, devoid of sentiment, moved over antique furniture, valuable paintings, and cherished collectibles. Serena clicked photos on her phone, muttering about appraisals and market values. Alara watched, numb as they cataloged her life, reducing it to mere assets. Her grief was secondary to their avarice. That evening, as the house finally quieted, a text message pinged on Alara's phone. It was from Serena. "Stop being dramatic about everything, Alara. This is urgent business, not a time for sentimentality. The lawyer expects to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." Alara stared at the screen, the words a cruel echo of the day's brutality. She felt utterly alone, vulnerable and profoundly betrayed. Her sons, the men she had raised, had stood by, silent witnesses to her humiliation. As darkness settled over the house, Alara sought refuge in her bedroom, a sanctuary that suddenly felt hollow without Arthur. She curled up on the large empty bed, tears finally flowing freely, quietly. Then, through the haze of her sorrow, Arthur's last words, spoken with a weak but reassuring smile from his hospital bed, echoed in her mind. "Don't worry, Alara," he had whispered, his hand gently squeezing hers. "I've made sure you'll be taken care of. They can't hurt you." The memory was a fragile lifeboat in her sea of despair. They can't hurt you. What had Arthur meant? A tiny spark, a flicker of something other than despair, ignited within Alara. She held onto that spark, wondering if Arthur, even in his final moments, had anticipated this betrayal. The atmosphere in Mr. Albright's pristine office was less like a meeting and more like a tribunal. Alara felt like the accused rather than the grieving widow. Her family, Liam, Ethan, Serena, and Clara, sat arranged around the large mahogany table, their expressions a mixture of impatience and thinly veiled avarice. They were ready for battle, their eyes fixed on Mr. Albright, Arthur's longtime attorney. Alara, still clad in a somber black dress, sat a little apart, a quiet island in a sea of anticipation. Mr. Albright, a man with kind eyes but a stern demeanor, cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming." He glanced at Alara, offering a small, sympathetic nod. "As you know, we are here to discuss Arthur's estate. I can confirm there was a will drawn up last year, as some of you are aware." He paused, adjusting his spectacles. "However, there have been some developments." Serena, who had been meticulously tapping her manicured fingers on the table, immediately perked up. Her eyes, which Alara suspected had already calculated her share of the rumored $8 million, sharpened. "Developments? What kind of developments? Have the assets been reevaluated? Is there an updated inventory?" Her questions came in a rapid-fire succession, betraying her eagerness. Albright held up a hand. "Arthur made some changes to his estate planning in his final weeks." He chose his words carefully, his gaze sweeping over the family's expectant faces. The air in the room crackled with a sudden tension. "What kind of changes?" Liam asked, his voice sharp, devoid of the earlier politeness. His easygoing facade had completely dissolved, replaced by a hard edge. Ethan, usually more reserved, leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. "Arthur expressed a clear desire to ensure certain provisions were met," Mr. Albright continued, his voice steady. "These changes were implemented with due legal process and witnessed appropriately." He pushed a stack of papers forward, but did not open them. "However, I cannot go into full details until the formal reading of the will, which is scheduled for Friday morning. Until then, these are sealed." A collective groan, barely stifled, rippled through the family. Serena's jaw tightened. Clara exchanged a quick, worried glance with Ethan. The deferral of full details clearly frustrated them, sparking visible tension in a flurry of whispered exchanges. Alara watched them, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. They were vultures, circling, their disappointment almost comical in its transparency. After the brief, unsatisfactory meeting, the family, still buzzing with indignation, followed Alara home. Serena, marching ahead, was already on her phone, her voice tight with annoyance. "Complications and delays, Robert. Yes, he insists on a formal reading. This wasn't the plan." Alara heard snippets of her conversation, confirming her suspicion that they had expected a quick, easy division of the spoils. Back at the house, the familiar routine began again, but with an intensified fervor. Liam and Ethan, now emboldened by the prospect of a delayed inheritance, moved through the house with an air of entitlement. They continued to catalog assets, their fingers tracing the outlines of every painting, every antique, every piece of jewelry, as if it were already theirs. They treated Alara's home not as a place of grieving, but as a collection of items waiting to be claimed. "This is my home," Alara finally protested, her voice wavering, but carrying a thread of newfound defiance. She stood in the doorway of the living room, watching Serena meticulously photograph a valuable vase. "Arthur and I built this life together." Serena didn't even look up from her phone. "Arthur's gone, Alara. We need to be practical. Sentimental value doesn't pay for upkeep or taxes. We're simply ensuring everything is accounted for." Her tone was dismissive, as if Alara's feelings were an inconvenience. Then came the final, chilling announcement. Serena, with Liam nodding in agreement, informed Alara that they would be moving into the guest room for a few days. "To help," Serena clarified, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You shouldn't be alone right now, and frankly, with all these estate matters, we need to be close by." Alara knew it was a thinly veiled attempt to assert control, to keep an even closer watch on her. She felt a cold dread creep into her bones. Later that evening, the sounds of their hushed voices drifted from the guest room. Alara, unable to sleep, found herself standing outside the door, drawn by an unsettling intuition. She overheard Serena's voice, sharp and clear. "We might need to consider declaring her incompetent, Liam. She's clearly not in a state to manage anything, especially an inheritance of this size." Liam's mumbled reply was indistinguishable, but the implication hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of betrayal. Incompetent. The word hit Alara like a physical blow. The next morning, Serena presented her plan over breakfast. "Given the delays and the complexities of Arthur's estate," she began, her tone overly sweet, "Liam and I think it would be best if we managed everything for you, Alara. We can set you up with a generous allowance, of course. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." She offered a saccharine smile, as if this were a benevolent gesture. "Well, yes," Liam added, echoing Serena's patronizing tone. "Arthur always said you were better at spending money than managing it. Didn't he, Mom?" Alara felt a hot flush of anger. She remembered her days before Arthur, running her own successful small business, balancing ledgers, making shrewd investments. Arthur had always respected her intelligence, her capability, even if she had stepped back to support his career later in life. The condescension was unbearable. "No," Alara said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I want to wait for the will reading. I want to hear what Arthur actually intended, from Mr. Albright himself." She looked directly at Serena, a hint of defiance in her eyes. "Until then, I will manage my own affairs." The rejection clearly surprised Serena, whose smile faltered. An awkward silence descended, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. Later that day, seeking solace in Arthur's study, Alara found herself idly running her hand along the underside of his old, familiar desk drawer. Her fingers brushed against something taped there. It was a business card, crisp and new, for a lawyer named Eleanor Reed. In Arthur's distinctive, elegant handwriting, a note was scribbled on the back. "For Alara only, tell no one." Alara's heart quickened. This was it. Arthur's final promise. A secret. A plan. The heavy oak front door swung open, and Serena and Liam burst into the house, their voices animated and their faces alight with a disturbing cheerfulness. "The market is ripe for investment properties, Liam," Serena exclaimed, shedding her expensive coat onto the nearest armchair. "And honestly, this place, as charming as it is a prime candidate for a quick sale. Think of the capital." Liam nodded eagerly, oblivious to Alara's presence in the living room. "The neighborhood alone would fetch a fortune. We could easily diversify with smaller, more manageable assets." Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her home. The very place where she had spent decades building a life with Arthur, where every nook and cranny held a cherished memory. Birthday parties, quiet evenings by the fire, Arthur's booming laughter. To them, it was just another asset, a property to be liquidated, an investment opportunity. The callous disregard for her feelings, for the very essence of her life with Arthur, was a fresh sting. Their casual conversation about selling her house felt like a physical eviction of her past, driven by a sudden, fierce protectiveness, and more importantly, by Arthur's mysterious clue. Alara knew she couldn't wait any longer. She had to call Eleanor Reed. The business card, tucked securely in her pocket, felt like a burning ember, a tiny spark of hope against the encroaching darkness. She waited until the family was out, ostensibly running errands, which Alara suspected meant scouting other properties or consulting with financial advisors. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number on the card. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Eleanor Reed, attorney at law. Hello, Alara began, her voice a little shaky. My name is Alara Vance. Arthur Vance, he left me your card. There was a brief pause on the other end. Then Eleanor Reed's voice softened, losing its initial formality. Mrs. Vance, I've been expecting your call. Please, can you come to my office this afternoon? The words expecting your call sent a jolt through Alara. Arthur had truly planned this. A tiny seed of hope began to sprout in her heart. Eleanor Reed's office was not what Alara expected. It was modest, located in a quiet building downtown, a stark contrast to the imposing glass and steel skyscraper that housed Mr. Albright's prestigious firm. The waiting room was small but tidy, filled with comfortable, worn armchairs and shelves of legal texts that looked genuinely used. Eleanor herself was a woman in her late 40s with kind, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Vance, Eleanor said, gesturing for Alara to sit. Arthur contacted me about 3 weeks before his passing. She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. He came to me to create a new will. Alara's breath hitched. A new will? But the family... Liam said Arthur showed them his will last year, that it divided everything equally. Eleanor nodded, her expression grim. The old will is indeed real, Mrs. Vance. It was dated a year ago, as your son stated, and it did indeed divide his assets among you, your sons, and his daughters-in-law. However, it is no longer valid. Arthur's final will was executed 18 days before his death. She slid a document across the table. The date stared up at Alara, stark and undeniable. Arthur's decision to change his will was not made lightly, Eleanor continued, her voice filled with a quiet gravity. He was, in his words, horrified by his family's behavior during his illness. He overheard conversations, saw their actions, and realized they were more concerned with their inheritance than his well-being. As Eleanor spoke, Alara was transported back to those final weeks. She recalled Arthur lying in his hospital bed, often appearing to be dozing, but his eyes, whenever they met hers, had held an unusual alertness. He hadn't just been resting, he had been observing. He had been evaluating their character, their true intentions, even as his own life ebbed away. The realization was a devastating blow, yet it also shed a light on his foresight. With trembling hands, Alara picked up the document. She found the paragraph she needed, her eyes scanning the precise legal language until a specific clause leaped out at her. She began to read, her voice a whisper. To my beloved wife Alara, who has stood by me through every challenge and loved me unconditionally, I leave the entirety of my estate, including all properties, financial accounts, and personal belongings, totaling approximately $8 million. Alara stopped, her mind reeling. The entirety? $8 million? She was speechless, the words swirling in a vortex of shock and disbelief. This was so far from what she had imagined, what the family had assumed. She reread the clause, her eyes darting back and forth, confirming the unbelievable truth. Then she forced herself to continue, her gaze dropping to the next paragraph, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. To my sons, Liam and Ethan, and to my daughter-in-law, Serena, who have shown through their actions and words during my illness that they value my money more than my life, I leave the sum of $1,000 each, a token of what little consideration they extended to me in my final days. This amount is to be paid directly from my estate, with no further claim or entitlement to any other assets. The papers slipped from Alara's numb fingers, fluttering onto the polished surface of the table. $1,000 each? It was an insult, a repudiation, a searing judgment delivered from beyond the grave. The magnitude of Arthur's decision, the sheer scale of his disappointment was staggering. She felt a wave of dizzying emotions, shock, sorrow for Arthur's pain, and a chilling sense of vindication. Eleanor, seeing Alara's reaction, reached across the table and gently placed another envelope in front of her. Arthur also asked me to give you this, Mrs. Vance. It's a personal letter. Alara's hands, still trembling, carefully opened the envelope. Inside, Arthur's familiar handwriting filled the page, explaining his profound sadness, his disappointment, and his unwavering love and trust in her. It was his final, most intimate confession and his ultimate act of protection. Alara's vision blurred as she unfolded Arthur's personal letter. His familiar handwriting, a testament to his careful nature, began with words that cut through her heart. My dearest Alara, if you are reading this, I am no longer with you physically, but know that my love for you is eternal. He went on to explain, in painstaking detail, the agony of his final weeks. He had spent countless hours in his hospital bed, his body failing, but his mind sharp and observant. He recounted how he had carefully watched and listened to their children and Serena, even when they believed him to be drifting in and out of consciousness. They thought my ears were closed to their avarice, my darling, Arthur had written, a profound sadness permeating his words. He had heard Serena, her voice often too loud and dismissive, encouraging Liam to sell the house quickly and to get Alara out of the way before she complicates things. He had heard Ethan, his own son, suggesting to Clara that Alara might not be mentally capable of handling the estate, hinting at guardianship. The betrayal was staggering, and Arthur had absorbed every painful word. Then Arthur shifted, reaffirming Alara's worth and capabilities. They underestimate you, my love, the letter continued. They forget how brilliantly you managed your own small business before we married, how astute you were with our household finances when I was traveling. You are strong, intelligent, and more than capable of handling anything. You deserve so much more than they were planning to give you. Scraps from your own life. Use this money to live the life you deserve, without compromise or apology. He explicitly warned her not to let them manipulate her into feeling guilty, not to allow their greed to dim her spirit. I love you always, Arthur. The letter ended and Alara broke down, hot tears streaming down her face. It was a torrent of sorrow, not just for Arthur's passing, but for the profound pain he had endured witnessing his own children's true colors. Yet, amidst the grief, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over her, mingled with an immense gratitude for his enduring love and foresight. He had seen through them, and he had protected her. Eleanor waited patiently for Alara to compose herself, offering a tissue and a gentle, knowing smile. Arthur was very specific about the timing of all of this, Mrs. Vance, she said softly. He anticipated their reaction. He knew they would contest the will, claiming undue influence, or that he was not of sound mind, or even that you somehow manipulated him. Eleanor then produced a thick file. To counter any such claims, Arthur took extensive measures. First, he underwent a comprehensive medical evaluation with Dr. Evelyn Stone, a renowned geriatric psychiatrist. This report unequivocally confirms his sound mind and full cognitive function right up until his final days. She slid a document across the table, the official seal of a medical practice clearly visible. Furthermore, Eleanor continued, her eyes holding Alara's, Arthur insisted that all our meetings regarding the new will be videotaped. These recordings clearly show him making his decisions freely, without any coercion or confusion. They are powerful evidence, Mrs. Vance, should your family try anything. As if this wasn't enough, Eleanor then reached into a drawer and retrieved a small, sleek recording device. Arthur also asked me to give this to you, Mrs. Vance, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He said it would help you understand why he felt he had to take such drastic action. Alara's fingers trembled as she took the device. With a deep breath, she pressed play. Arthur's voice, clear and strong despite the illness that ravaged him, filled the modest office. It was a recording he had made himself, a heartfelt monologue, raw with emotion. Alara, my darling, and his voice began, if you are listening to this, it means I am gone and our children have undoubtedly shown their true selves. It breaks my heart to say this, but I saw it. I saw their greed, their impatience. I saw Serena roll her eyes when you tried to speak about our future, Liam dismiss your opinions as trivial, And Ethan spoke of you as a burden, someone to be managed, rather than the capable, loving woman you are. He paused, a sigh escaping him. It hurt, Alara, more than the pain of my illness. To see the children we raised, the legacy we built, reduced to a commodity in their eyes. But I couldn't let them hurt you. I couldn't let them take what we built together. What you deserve. Arthur's voice grew steadier, imbued with his characteristic strength. You deserve to be treated with the respect and love you've earned, not as an afterthought or an obstacle. This estate is yours. It always should have been. Live well, my darling. Be happy. Know that I loved you and I protected you to my very last breath. The recording clicked off, leaving an echoing silence in the room. Alara sat, overwhelmed, tears of relief and love for the incredible man who had been her husband. He hadn't just protected her financially. He had protected her dignity, her peace of mind, and her very sense of self. He had seen her, truly seen her, even when his own sons had not. Alara wiped her tears, a newfound resolve hardening her gaze. I'm ready, Eleanor, she said, her voice clear and strong. I'm ready for the will reading. Ready for the moment of truth? My family thought they had it all figured out, but Arthur had a few more surprises in store. You won't believe what happened next. Don't miss a single detail. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to hear the rest of my story. Monday morning dawned, crisp and bright, but for Alara, it felt like the eve of a storm. She arrived at Mr. Albright's office precisely at 9, her heart a drumbeat in her chest. The conference room was already buzzing. Her family was there, dressed in their finest, an uncomfortable mix of somber black and expensive accessories. Serena wore a severe black pantsuit, her perfect blonde hair pulled back tightly, while Liam and Ethan were in dark suits, their expressions a studied blend of sorrow and anticipation. Even her grandchildren, Finn and Chloe, Serena's children, were there, looking bored and occasionally whispering, as if this were some formal, yet ultimately lucrative social event. They clearly expected their share of Arthur's fortune. Mr. Albright, usually unflappable, seemed unusually ill at ease. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie, his gaze sweeping over the expectant faces. Good morning, everyone, he began, his voice a little strained. Thank you for gathering. We are here today for the reading of Arthur Vance's last will and testament. He paused, taking a deep breath. However, there has been a development regarding Arthur's estate. Serena, ever the first to speak, leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. A development? Has the market seen an uptick? Has the value of the portfolio increased significantly? She sounded as if she were talking about a stock report, not her recently deceased father-in-law's legacy. Mr. Albright met her gaze with a tight smile. Not exactly, Mrs. Vance. What I mean is, we have been presented with a more recent will that supersedes the document we had originally planned to read today. The atmosphere in the room plummeted. The excited chatter ceased. The air, thick with anticipation moments ago, became heavy, suffocating. Liam's jaw dropped. What do you mean, more recent? He exclaimed, his voice incredulous. Dad showed us his will last year. It was all settled. Ethan, never one to mask his frustration, slammed his hand on the polished mahogany table with a resounding thud. This is insane. Someone obviously took advantage of him in his final days. He was ill. He was vulnerable. His furious gaze, along with every other pair of eyes in the room, swiveled to Alara. The accusation was unspoken, but clear. She was the manipulator. Alara met their hostile stares with a quiet calm. I assure you I did no such thing, she stated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Serena narrowed her eyes, a venomous glint in their depths. Oh, really, Alara? You spent the most time with him in the hospital. You were there, alone, day in and day out. Are you truly saying you didn't pressure him? Didn't whisper things in his ear when he was weak and confused? Just as the tension threatened to erupt, the office door opened and Eleanor Reed walked in. She was impeccably dressed, carrying a slim leather briefcase, her expression composed and professional. The family looked at her, utterly confused. Who was this woman? Eleanor surveyed the room, her gaze resting briefly on Alara, before turning to Mr. Albright. Good morning, Mr. Albright. I trust I'm not late. Mr. Albright, visibly relieved, nodded. Not at all, Ms. Reed. Please, come in. Everyone, this is Eleanor Reed. He then directed his words to the family. Ms. Reed represents the Vance estate regarding Arthur's final will and testament. She has the most recent legally binding document. Liam sprang to his feet, his face reddening with rage. This is insane. We don't recognize any other lawyer. Dad always used Mr. Albright. Eleanor remained calm, her composure unruffled. I understand your confusion, Mr. Vance, she said, her voice clear and authoritative. However, Arthur William Vance retained my services to draft his final will. All necessary legal procedures were followed meticulously. She opened her briefcase, extracting a stack of documents. I have here a medical evaluation from Dr. Evelyn Stone, a geriatric psychiatrist, confirming Mr. Vance's mental competency at the time of the will's execution. Furthermore, I have affidavits from witnesses to the signing, along with video recordings of our meetings, clearly demonstrating Mr. Vance's sound mind and free will. The mention of video recordings silenced Liam, but his fury simmered just beneath the surface. Eleanor placed the documents on the table, then picked up the formal will. She cleared her throat and began to read, her voice resonating with clarity. I, Arthur William Vance, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments and declare this to be my final will and testament. A collective gasp swept through the room. Alara kept her eyes fixed on Eleanor, her heart pounding, but a strange sense of calm settled over her. This was it, Arthur's final word. Eleanor continued, her voice unwavering, as she reached the crucial section, the words Arthur had written, born from his profound sadness and unwavering love. To my beloved wife, Alara Vance, who has been my steadfast partner, my dearest friend, and the true love of my life, through all joys and sorrows, I hereby bequeath my entire estate, including all real property, financial assets, investments, and personal belongings, valued at approximately $8 million. This represents my complete and unconditional trust in her and my wish for her to live a life of peace and security. The words hung in the air, a thunderclap in the silent room. $8 million, the entire estate, to Alara, alone. A deafening silence descended upon the room, so profound that the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to roar. It was as if the air itself had been sucked out, leaving everyone breathless. Emma, one of the grandchildren who had been idly scrolling on her phone, let it slip from her grasp, the faint clatter echoing in the stunned quiet. Serena, her face a mask of disbelief, her meticulously applied makeup suddenly stark against her pallor, managed a strangled whisper. What? Eleanor, unmoved by the palpable shock, continued reading, her voice clear and unwavering. She moved to the next clause, her words delivering a second, equally devastating blow. To my son, Liam Vance, to my son, Ethan Vance, and to my daughter-in-law, Serena Vance, I leave the sum of $1,000 each. This modest bequest reflects my profound disappointment in their behavior and priorities during my final illness, a time when they showed more interest in my financial assets and the swift liquidation of my estate than in my personal comfort, dignity, or well-being. The words struck like lightning. Liam, his face contorted with a mixture of shock and incandescent rage, leaped to his feet, overturning his chair with a crash. This is fraud, he screamed, his voice raw with fury. This is elder abuse. She manipulated him. That witch poisoned his mind. He pointed a trembling finger at Alara, his eyes blazing with hatred. Eleanor remained calm, raising a hand. The will isn't finished, Mr. Vance. There's more. Her voice was a steel rod cutting through the chaos. She proceeded to read Arthur's detailed explanation, a heart-wrenching account of his final weeks. He described how, from his hospital bed, he had observed their true priorities, heard every whispered conversation about liquidating assets, dividing up property, and their cold, calculated plans to manage Alara. He recounted the specific instances, Serena's dismissive remarks, Liam's focus on market value over sentiment, Ethan's casual mention of competency evaluations. These conversations, Eleanor read from Arthur's will, his words now delivered through her voice, broke my heart and opened my eyes. They revealed a level of callousness and greed that I never imagined possible from my own flesh and blood. It became clear that their love was conditional, tied inextricably to my wealth. Arthur's will further emphasized Alara's unwavering sacrifices, her boundless love, and his fervent desire for her to live her remaining years in comfort and dignity, free from the burden of their avarice. Ethan, white-faced, frantically shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. No, no, Dad wouldn't do this. He loved us. He would never. His voice was choked with denial. He did love you, Ethan, Alara said softly, her voice carrying a profound sadness. She finally spoke, her gaze meeting her son's. That's why this hurt him so much. It broke his heart to realize what you truly valued. Serena, however, was beyond reason. She rounded on Alara, her face a mask of pure venom. You conniving witch, she spat, her voice dripping with malice. You poisoned his mind when he was vulnerable. You whispered lies. You're not getting away with this, Alara. We'll fight this in court. We'll expose you. Eleanor, without a word, reached into her briefcase and produced a small, sleek video camera, placing it on the table for all to see. The digital display blinked. Actually, Mrs. Vance, Eleanor stated calmly, I think you'll find that Mrs. Alara Vance had absolutely nothing to do with Arthur's decision. Your father-in-law was extremely meticulous in his final wishes. She continued, her voice gaining strength. He not only recorded several video statements outlining his intentions and reasons, but he also kept a detailed personal journal during his final illness, chronicling his observations and feelings regarding his family's behavior. These, along with the certified medical evaluations confirming his full mental competency, should leave no doubt as to the validity of his final will. Eleanor then picked up a leather-bound journal. If you wish, I can read some entries. She didn't wait for their reply, her gaze piercing. Entry October 10th. Serena visited today ostensibly to check on me, but her true purpose was clear. Overheard her telling Liam they needed to handle Alara carefully after I'm gone, to ensure she doesn't squander the inheritance. The sheer audacity. My own daughter-in-law planning to strip my wife of her autonomy before I'm even cold. A gasp escaped Clara, Ethan's wife, who looked utterly horrified. The color drained from Serena's face. Eleanor turned a page. Entry, October 12th. Ethan suggested to Clara that Alara might need a competency evaluation to protect her from making poor financial decisions. My own son already plotting to declare his mother incompetent. My heart aches for Alara, who deserves so much more than this betrayal. The room fell deadly quiet, pierced only by the distant city sounds. Every greedy plan, every dismissive comment, every calculated whisper that they thought unheard and unseen was now laid bare. Revealed not by Alara, but by Arthur himself, through his precise, meticulous foresight. The weight of their own words, captured and preserved by the man they thought to exploit, crushed them under its undeniable truth. The heavy silence in the room was finally broken, not by one of the adults, but by Finn. He slowly looked up from his phone, which had been his constant companion, his youthful face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Wait, he mumbled, the realization slowly setting in. So we're not getting anything? What about my college money? Grandpa promised he'd pay for my MBA. Eleanor, her expression completely devoid of sympathy, responded matter-of-factly. You're getting exactly what your grandfather thought you deserved, Finn. $1,000 each. Next to him, Chloe, who had been quietly wiping tears from her eyes, let out a wail. It wasn't the sound of grief, but of profound, self-centered disappointment. But I was going to buy that new designer bag, she sobbed, and the trip to Milan. Her childish lament highlighted the superficiality of their expectations, painting a stark picture of a family consumed by material desires. Liam, however, seemed to snap out of his stupor. He rounded on Alara, his earlier fury replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. Mom, you can't let this stand. This isn't what Dad would have wanted. He loved us. He wanted to take care of all of us, not just you. He attempted to grab her hand, but Alara pulled away. He did take care of the person he felt deserved it, Alara replied, her voice steady, tinged with sadness but unwavering resolve. He took care of me. He protected me from this very moment. Serena, her face still pale but now hardened with defiance, pointed a finger at Alara. This is outrageous. We'll contest this. We'll drag this through court for years, Alara. You won't see a penny of that money for a decade. She seemed to regain a sliver of her former confidence, believing she still held some power. Eleanor merely raised an eyebrow, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "I wouldn't advise that, Mrs. Vance," she stated calmly. "Arthur was quite thorough. His will includes a no-contest clause. Should any beneficiary challenge the will, they will forfeit their entire bequest, even the $1,000. And furthermore, they will be responsible for $50,000 towards the estate's legal defense costs." The room fell into a stunned, utter silence once more. The reality of Arthur's foresight settled heavily upon them. He hadn't just changed his will, he had meticulously dismantled their every possible line of attack, blocking every greedy move they might make. He had anticipated their reactions, their accusations, their legal threats, and had built an impenetrable fortress around Alara and his true intentions. Alara slowly rose from her seat. The meeting was over. There was nothing left to say. As she turned to leave, Serena made one last, desperate plea, her voice strained and thin. "Alara, think about family. Think about your grandchildren's futures. This money is meant to help us all." Alara paused at the door, her back to them. She turned her head slightly, her gaze sweeping over the shocked, angry, and utterly defeated faces of her children and their spouses. "I am thinking about family, Serena," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The family of two that Arthur and I built together. A family based on love, respect, and trust. Values, it seems, that were lost on the rest of you." With that, Alara walked out, Eleanor Reed following closely behind. As she stepped into the cool autumn air, leaving the stifling office and the furious, defeated family behind, Alara felt a profound sense of lightness. Arthur had done it. He had given her not just financial security, but vindication, protection, and above all, freedom. His presence, strong and loving, seemed to envelop her, guiding her forward. Back home, the peace was short-lived. Her phone, which she had silenced during the reading, now vibrated incessantly. A barrage of angry, desperate calls and texts flooded in. Liam's messages progressed from thinly veiled attempts at persuasion. "Mom, let's talk about this rationally. We can work something out," to outright rage. "You ruined everything. How could you do this to us?" Ethan's messages were similar, escalating from disappointment to accusations. Then came Serena's messages, her words spitting venom, a true reflection of her raw fury. "You selfish witch! How dare you betray your own family like this? Harold would be ashamed of what you've become. You deserve to be utterly alone." Alara, ignoring the ringing and the buzzing, walked into Arthur's study. She sat in his worn leather armchair, the scent of old books and Arthur's subtle cologne offering a strange comfort. She pulled out his journal, the very one Eleanor had referenced. This wasn't just about money, it was about the truth, and about the man who had loved her enough to fight for her, even from beyond the grave. The leather-bound journal felt heavy in Alara's hands, a testament to Arthur's final agony. She began to read, her heart breaking with each entry, each word a fresh wound that Arthur had endured alone. He meticulously documented their callousness, their thinly veiled greed, their utter disregard for his impending death. He described how Serena, just outside his hospital room, had been booking a European cruise, her voice bright with anticipation, while he lay struggling for breath. He'd noted Liam, ever the pragmatist, subtly leaving a real estate agent's card on his bedside table, a clear signal of his plans to liquidate the house. Arthur even recalled overhearing Ethan and Clara, not once but twice, arguing in the hallway about private school tuition, referencing money he hadn't even left them, as if his death were merely a financial transaction for their convenience. But the most devastating entry, the one that brought fresh tears to Alara's eyes, described a moment when Arthur had suffered a severe bout of chest pains. Serena had been present. Her first words, her only concern, had been about emergency contacts and account numbers, not a single inquiry about his pain, his fear, or his fading life. It was a brutal portrait of indifference, a stark revelation of their true priorities. Reading Arthur's journal, Alara understood. He hadn't just left her money, he had left her validation. He had provided irrefutable evidence, not just for the courts, but for her own heart, confirming that her feelings about their coldness were not an imagined grief but a painful truth. He'd given her the strength to face them. Just then the doorbell chimed, a persistent, almost demanding ring. Alara peered through the peephole. The entire family stood on her porch. Liam, Ethan, Serena, Clara, and even Finn and Chloe, their faces a mixture of forced contrition and thinly veiled outrage. They wanted to talk. Alara took a deep breath, fortified by Arthur's words, and opened the door. "Come in," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. They trooped into the living room, an awkward silence hanging between them. Serena, taking the lead, adopted a placating tone. "Alara, we need to discuss this. Arthur clearly made a terrible mistake. He was ill, on heavy pain medication. He wasn't himself." She looked around the opulent room, her eyes lingering on the expensive art, as if mentally calculating what she was losing. Liam chimed in, "Mom, Dad loved his children. He always wanted to provide for his grandchildren's futures. It just doesn't reflect the Arthur we knew." Alara looked at them, a calm, almost serene expression on her face. "I think it reflects exactly the man you knew," she responded, her voice soft but firm. "You just didn't know him as well as you thought you did. You only saw what you wanted to see." Clara, usually quiet, stepped forward, attempting to guilt-trip Alara. "Think about Finn and Chloe, Alara. They're devastated. Their futures, without Grandpa's help, what will they do?" Alara finally allowed herself a small, knowing smile. "Oh, but Arthur did make provisions for their futures, Clara. Just not in the way you assumed. He set up college funds for both of them, with very specific conditions, maintaining good grades, demonstrating respect, and showing genuine ambition. Those funds were established years ago, separate from his main estate, contingent on their merit, not on his death." She then dropped a bombshell. "In fact, Finn, isn't it true you actually received a full scholarship for your MBA from the university last month? I saw the text you sent Arthur, boasting about it. You had no intention of needing his money for college, did you?" Finn's face went crimson. He stared at his feet, unable to meet Alara's gaze. "And Chloe," Alara continued, her eyes turning to her granddaughter. "Didn't you tell Arthur, just last week, that you decided to postpone your study abroad and were thinking of taking a gap year, using the money for a round-the-world trip instead? He was thrilled you were exploring your independence, but also noted you didn't mention using your own savings." Chloe, usually so confident, now looked mortified, her lower lip trembling. The carefully constructed facade of devastation crumbled before Alara's quiet truth. Alara turned her full attention to Liam and Ethan, her sons. Her voice lost its softness, replaced by a steely resolve. "You two," she stated bluntly, "you counted on your father's death to solve your financial problems. You saw his illness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. You used his final days as a blueprint for your own gain." She paused, letting her words sink in, the undeniable truth hanging heavy in the air. "Arthur saw it. He heard it. He felt your indifference and your greed, and he made his decision accordingly." Alara took a step back, her final message delivered with the quiet dignity Arthur would have admired. "Family doesn't mean you're entitled to someone else's money. It doesn't mean you can disrespect them, dismiss their feelings, and then expect to profit from their passing. Family means you love people for who they are, not for what they can give you. And if that love is only conditional on wealth, then it was never truly love at all." As the last member of her family stormed out of the house, leaving a vacuum of angry silence in their wake, Alara stood by the doorway, her shoulders finally dropping. She watched them pile into their cars, a mixture of anger, confusion, and defiant disbelief etched on their faces. Serena's final glare was a poisoned dart, but it no longer pierced Alara's shield of quiet resolve. Liam slammed his car door. Ethan sped away, leaving only tire marks on the driveway. A profound sadness settled over Alara, a deep ache for the broken family that once was. The chasm between them now seemed insurmountable, widened by greed and resentment. Yet beneath the grief, an immense sense of relief bloomed, fragile but real. The burden she had carried for so long, the constant performance of familial harmony, had been lifted. Arthur, even in death, had granted her freedom. 6 months later, Alara stood on the expansive deck of her new oceanfront cottage in Maine. The salty breeze carried the cry of gulls, and the endless expanse of the Atlantic sparkled under a clear sky. Here, amidst the rugged beauty of the coast, she felt a peace she hadn't known in years, a sense of boundless possibilities stretching before her. The move had been cathartic. She had sold the grand, old house, filled with the ghosts of a life that no longer served her, to a young family whose laughter now echoed within its walls. She had kept only the truly cherished items: Arthur's favorite armchair, a few paintings they had collected together, the journal, in a small, exquisite silver locket he had given her on their first anniversary. The rest, the excess, had been shed like an old skin. The phone calls from her family had gradually tapered off. After the initial barrage of outrage and a few half-hearted attempts at reconciliation, always thinly veiled pleas for a share of the inheritance, silence had descended. It was a silence Alara had learned to embrace, to fill with the quiet rhythm of her new life. Now a full year had passed since Arthur's death. The leaves in Maine were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, mirroring the vibrant new hues in Alara's own life. Eleanor Reed, who had become a trusted friend and confidant, sat with her on the cottage deck, sipping tea. "How are you truly feeling, Alara?" Eleanor asked, her gaze warm and understanding. Alara smiled, looking out at the churning sun. "Peaceful, Eleanor. Truly peaceful. I think Arthur would be proud." Earlier that morning, Alara had visited Arthur's new grave. It was in a beautiful, serene seaside cemetery, not far from her cottage, overlooking the same ocean that now brought her so much solace. She had placed a single white rose on the simple headstone, feeling his presence not as a loss, but as an enduring strength. "I've started painting classes," Alara told Eleanor, her eyes sparkling. "And a book club. I've met some wonderful people. And you know, Emma, she actually decided to go through with her study abroad. She's in Florence right now, absolutely loving it. She's sending me postcards, telling me all about her art history classes." Eleanor smiled. "That's wonderful, Alara. I always thought Emma had a good heart." "And Finn," Alara continued, a softer note in her voice. "He actually started graduate school, studying environmental law. He's getting all A's. He sent me an email the other day, thanking me for the unexpected push. I think seeing how much Arthur stood his ground really made him reflect." A shadow crossed Alara's face briefly. "I do miss Liam and Ethan, sometimes," she admitted, her voice wistful. "The people I thought they were. But I don't miss the burden, the constant expectation, the feeling of walking on eggshells." She remembered Dr. Evelyn Stone, Arthur's psychiatrist, remarking during one of their post-will meetings, "Arthur always wanted you to discover yourself again, Mrs. Vance, not just as his wife, but as Alara." Alara reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded letter, worn soft from frequent handling. It was a letter she had written to Arthur, but had never sent. "I want to read you something," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "My dearest Arthur," she began, her voice quivering slightly. "It's been a year, and I want to tell you how grateful I am, not just for the security you left me, but for the clarity, for the validation. You protected me, not just from financial ruin, but from the insidious pain of being unseen, unvalued by our own children. You gave me back my strength, my dignity. Because of you, I'm traveling again, seeing the world with fresh eyes. I'm learning to play the piano, something I always dreamed of. I'm painting again, finding a voice in colors. I am finally, truly discovering who Alara Vance is, independent of everything. You saved me, my love, and I promise to live a life worthy of your trust and your profound love." Alara finished, her eyes wet but shining with a deep, abiding peace. Eleanor reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Just then her phone buzzed. It was a text, a photo of a sun-drenched piazza, followed by a message from Emma. "Thinking of you, Grandma. Florence is incredible. Wish you were here. Love you." Alara smiled, a genuine, joyful smile. Some relationships could heal. Some broken bonds, with time and space, could mend, or at least transform into something hopeful. Arthur's final gift was not just an inheritance of money, but an inheritance of self, a profound new beginning.